you, Warren, for inviting me, and thanks to everybody for being here. This afternoon talk, my topic today is blindness as creative force. So I'm going to begin with a little bit of background, and I'm going to talk about the challenges of metaphorical thinking, plus my book, and then my journey to the social model of disability through storytelling. And then finally, moving from being an ocular-centric performer to being an olfactory and touch-centered performer. And finally, I'll talk a little bit about my present project, photography, image description, and a dash of AI, speaking of robots. So before all of that, I'm going to do a quick self-description. I am a blind woman of Northern and Southern European peasant stock. I have long brown hair, and I'm wearing a black sheer turtleneck today under a black jean jacket. I'm wearing a short silvery skirt with tall black boots, but you can't see that. You also can't see my red and white cane, which is folded under my seat, and his name is Moses. I am beaming to you from the beautiful New York Public Library, so from my library to yours today. Maybe one question we should ask is, why do we self-describe? Self-description gives blind folks access to your visual presence, and it also lets you shape how you are seen, because of course, seeing happens not just in the eyes, but in the mind, in the brain. So self-description helps people imagine you as you want to be imagined. And I'm going to make a quick note on my use of the word blind. For my purposes, blind people designates those who identify as blind. Blindness does not necessarily mean a total lack of sight. In fact, the vast majority of us have some vision. I have a degenerative eye disease, so I've lived on pretty much every notch of the sight blindness spectrum. I started out life with normal vision, lost it super gradually over many years, and now I am totally blind. But I still consider myself to be a very visual person. So when I get a really good image description, the image takes shape in my mind's eye. And at some point it turns from being like a collection of words to being a mental image that's stored in my brain with all the vividness of memory. And for people who have some residual vision, an image description can help to organize or identify what they can still see. The name of this talk, as I said, is Blindness as Creative Force. And I kind of stole-ish this from a book called Crip Authorship. It's by Mara Mills and Rebecca Sanchez. It features disabled authors such as Georgina Klieg, who some of you I'm sure know. Her book, More Than Meets the Eye, What Blindness Brings to Art. It really inspired kind of the direction that my work is going with photography, which I'll get to in a little bit. Crip Authorship also features disabled artists like Finnegan Shannon, who disrupts museum spaces with their benches that read things like, "I'd rather be sitting. Sit if you agree." I obviously highly recommend the book, but here's the quote that caught me up short. "There is a strand of theory that understands disability to be a creative force, a spur, a method of production. The mismatch between disabled body minds and built and social environments leads to particular crip ways of thinking, being, representing, and making." So I repurposed disability as creative force, as designers do, and I made it my tagline, blindness as creative force. And this talk is kind of an overview of how the concept has shaped my work, even before I had a neat slogan for it. Everything I had done as an academic and artist made its way into my first book, Their Plant Eyes, A Personal and Cultural History of Blindness. I am so silly. I should have a book right here. There's one in the other room, but I won't go get it. I don't know, Warren, if you're still on the screen, you can always do a little product placement if you would like to.
I'm still yeah. So I
Yeah.
can hold it up, I think, if people try to see it.
With this nice violet speckled cover. And I'm
Yes.
just going to read a little bit from the introduction, which is, of course, me reading is me using my electronic voice to read in my ear. Some of you know this. I use the sort of unsexy voice of my JAWS screen reader to help me read along. So this is from the introduction, Seeing and Not Seeing. When I first started going blind, I lost a bit of my central vision, leaving me unable to read normal-sized print by the time I was about 16. Aside from some night blindness, I walked around without assistance, no cane, no dog for years. I was emphatically not blind, but now I am. Although Their Plant Eyes is not about me, you're going to hear, if you read it, quite a bit from me within its pages, because blindness is not just a subject, it is a perspective. My long years of vision loss inevitably inform this cultural history of blindness across literary, scientific, philosophical, and autobiographical writings. Conversely, my study of blindness in our ocular-centric world, that is to say, a world dominated by the visual, reveals a great deal about how we, blind and sighted alike, conceptualize our abilities and disabilities. Ocular centrism dictates that blindness when... Is there any problem with my visuals here, Warren? Am I still on? Because I got a little notification that said that my video went off. Oops, are you there? Am I still on? Am I talking to the void?
We can still hear you. We just
Oh yeah,
can't see.
sorry, I keep forgetting to unmute myself. Yeah, we can still hear you, but for some reason your camera doesn't seem
My
to be on.
camera just went off, didn't it? Yeah, it get a little notification. I wonder why. Let me just make sure I have battery. That would be good, right? Let's just
That
make
might be
sure.
the issue.
Let's just see. I'm just gonna check. 77%. I think that should be just fine. I don't think that should affect. Okay, let me just turn on my phone.
Okay,
There
there
it
we
is.
go. Now you're back.
It just had a mind of its own.
Sometimes technology does that. All right.
Ocular centrism. Well, see, it heard me talking about ocular centrism, and it's like, why do you need video, right? Why be so ocular centric?
Exactly.
Oculocentrism dictates that blindness, when literal, translates into not just a different, but a lesser way of perceiving the world. However, when measured in metaphorical ways, in metaphorical terms, especially in religious and literary contexts, blindness signifies how eyes can get in the way of spiritual and artistic transcendence. And this is a theme taken up by the blind poet John Milton in Paradise Lost, from which I borrowed my title's name. You probably didn't think that you were going to get a little bit of 17th century literature here, but I'm just going to quote a little bit from John Milton's amazing poem, Paradise Lost. It'll be over soon, though. So much the rather thou, celestial light, shine inward, and the mind through all her powers irradiate, their plant eyes, all mist from thence purge and disperse, that I may see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. So John Milton is basically saying, plant those eyeballs somewhere else, like in your heart, in your mind, in your belly, right? And use them metaphorically. Of course, this is mixing up a lot of the things that I kind of argue against, right? The idea that blindness is connected with ignorance and that sight is connected with wisdom or intelligence. But still, it's a powerful metaphor, right? So by reading metaphorical blindness against its realities, we may begin to learn how blindness has shaped our culture in so many ways. Considering the ways that human visions is necessarily limited by our sense organs, blindness helps to give credence to the idea of perfect sightedness. And by interrogating these biases and misconceptions, we may notice cracks in our Western imagination regarding the sense that many consider to be the most important. A final little note on Milton: he was embroiled in 17th century politics until he went blind. And then he was inspired by the metaphor of blindness and the blind poet, the blind bard. And so he returned to his first love of poetry and wrote Paradise Lost, right? Which is one of the, arguably great epics of world literature. So this is a perfect example of how blindness kind of spurred him on to create something. Blindness and sight, as well as their analogs, darkness and light, constitute a fundamental dichotomy, but that has not been my experience. And it's not the experience of most blind people, a very small percentage of whom were born with absolutely no sight. Furthermore, the congenitally blind generally find the equating of blindness with darkness or blackness particularly absurd, as these terms derive meaning only with the experience of their opposites. And I too, now that I am blind, find that I do not live in darkness. Rather, I'm bombarded with light. The constant hallucinogenic, pulsating, pixelated snow fuzz that is the remainder of my vision actually keeps me from experiencing the blackness of night. In reality, blindness is most often incomplete and spotty, degenerating and contingent. And in their plant eyes, with the help of examples taken from my own life and the lives of others, as well as artistic, philosophical, and scientific representations of blindness, we can begin to unravel the symbols and ideas upholding the notion that one is either sighted or blind. By tracing the complexities of literal and metaphorical blindness and sight, their plant eyes seeks to chip away at the pervasive ocular centrism of our culture, to open up a space for social justice that accepts sensorial difference, to celebrate the vast dappled regions between seeing and not seeing, blindness and sight, darkness and light. Although I refer to my performance life in Their Plant Eyes, specifically my solo show about Helen Keller performing in vaudeville, which is true. Keller did perform in the vaudeville circuit for 4 years, 1920 to 24, and she liked it. I hadn't performed much in recent years, mostly because I moved away from New York City and also because COVID happened. And so when I moved back to New York City, I began thinking about a new solo storytelling show. I called it, wait for it, Sighted People Suck, all caps with an exclamation mark. And it took the audience on a journey of self-discovery, from the intense shame I felt as a little kid losing my sight to the realization that the stigma of blindness is often far worse than the blindness itself. It isn't blindness that sucks, but rather ocular-centric ableist discrimination that sucks. In novels, films, and in real life, sighted people often say, I'd rather be dead than blind. I wanted my show to confront that obnoxious statement head on. So the personal stories illustrated how I evolved from feeling weighed down by societal stigma to developing a punk sensibility, and then learning about the social model of disability, and finally recognizing disability as creative force. Here's just a little bit from that performance, beginning at the point when I admit, about 3/4 of the way through the show, I confess that not all sighted people suck. I like a lot of you a lot, but ocular centrism definitely sucks. Ocular centrism insists that sighted people are better than blind people, and that sighted ways of doing things are the only ways of doing things. Ocular centrism makes being blind so much harder than it has to be. Now, perhaps some of you, I doubt it in this audience, but maybe some of you are thinking, no way, lady, blindness definitely sucks. I don't suck. Well, all I can tell you is that when you have 2 or more blind people in a room, real life or virtual, the number one thing that we complain about, hands down, the number one thing we complain about, sighted people. How sighted people infantilize us, disrespect us, refuse to hire us, are afraid of us, can't imagine loving us, are unwilling to get to know us, are incapable of treating us like humans, or at least like adult humans. The other day at the drugstore, I was with my partner, Alabaster, and he was heading to work. I was heading home. So I put all the toilet paper and stuff into my backpack. The cashier says, "She does really good." Alabaster says, "Good? She has a PhD." And I say, "I'm right here. You can, talk to me directly." And the woman repeats, "Yeah, she's blind, but she does really good." I left the store and my blood was boiling. Where does she get off? But then by the time I mobilitied myself home with Moses, I calmed down a little bit and I thought to myself, oh, whatever. I do good. I am a blind person making my way in a world that was not built for me. I do good, but maybe not in the way she thinks. I wish she could have seen me the other night, coming home a little bit tipsy from dinner with 12 kick-ass disabled women artists. And I shared an Uber home with one of them. I live on Delancey Street at the foot of the Williamsburg Bridge, 2 doors down from the velvet ropes of the Delancey nightclub. It was Friday night and drivers were in a life or death race to get wherever they were going on their Friday night. And so they honk if there's even a hint of a stop. The Uber driver is worried. He says, "They don't want me to stop." And I tell him, don't worry. When they see that we are disabled, they will calm down. So my friend gets out of the Uber and there's like a tentative little honk. And then there's another while she waits for me because they can't see her unsteady gait. Surely they will stop honking when they see Moses. I scooch out Cain first. And there's another honk. I get out, another honk. And now I am really pissed. I stand in the open door and I shake Moses at the cars behind us and I yell, "Oh, shut the hell up, you." It's a weekday afternoon, so I won't use the epithet, but basically, you jerks. Shut the hell up, you jerks. And I wave my cane at them. And the people in line at the Delancey, they like suddenly erupt in cheers and claps. And I wave and I blow kisses to my fans. I hug my friend goodbye. I stand with my back to my door for a little moment and I take it all in. It's all totally hectic and beautiful and entirely too damn much. in the quintessential New York City way. The hip Asian restaurant is pumping out spicy, savory deliciousness. A car on the Williamsburg Bridge on-ramp is blaring 1980s Madonna. Another one is playing what I can only describe as psychedelic mariachi, maybe. And a third has its bass so bassy that it travels down the pillars of the bridge through my feet. And for a moment, my heart beats in time with its rhythm. Everybody is getting their party going in their special little snowflake ways because, of course, diversity is what makes this city pump. Disability is part of that diversity. The different ways we sense the world, the different ways we move through the world, the different ways we are embodied in the world for such a short time. I'm reminded of the late, great disability activist, performer, writer. He said, Neil Marcus, he said, disability is not a brave struggle or courage in the face of adversity. Disability is an art. So I turn and I put my key in the lock and I step inside. The door springs shut behind me. The curtain falls on another spectacular day of performing blind, of living the art of blindness. So I want to turn now, it's 3:24, great, doing a little time check here. I want to turn now to sensory translation and how I transformed from being a traditional ocular-centric in the spotlight performer to being an olfactory and tactily centric performer. Sighted People Suck was a success. The audience responded with really enthusiastic, sometimes like a revival tent energy, shouting affirmations like, "Say it, sister." But despite the great response from both blind and sighted audience members, I did not perform Sighted People Suck again. And I'm not entirely sure that I will. There seemed something fundamentally misguided about standing in the spotlight in a vision-centric theater, the very word coming from the Greek word to look at, and standing there bitching about oculocentrism. I needed to find a new way, a new methodological way. So while I was trying to figure out what to do next, I had a revelatory conversation with my friend, the disabled artist Finnegan Shannon, who I mentioned earlier. I was telling them how I felt like my work was being skewed by my anger and frustration at the endless ableism that I encounter everywhere, in life and in the arts. And instead of feeling vindicated, this work often makes me feel exhausted and depleted. Finnegan said, very wisely, stop producing work in reaction to, just create. For years, I've been fascinated by Scent. My online magazine, Aromatica Poetica, is an arts and culture laboratory for the advancement of smell and taste. If there are any writers out there, I welcome submissions, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. But I wondered, can I bring an olfactory sensibility to performance? Hence, Becoming Blind as a Bat was born at Olfactory Art Keller in New York City. I blindfolded the audience not to simulate blindness, but to get their damn eyes off of me, but also, more importantly, to urge the audience to focus on their other senses, smell and touch. The so-called lower senses, as 2,000 some odd years of Western philosophy would have us believe. Well, we spit on that philosophy. Aristotle, Kant, I'm talking to you. I created scented tactile tokens unique to each story, and each member of the audience received their own tokens to smell, touch, and take home with them, fostering a new type of non-visual intimacy. Instead of projections or colored gels or musical swells, my special effects include such things as cedar-scented velvet-wrapped stones and anise-scented coffee bean cocoons and gin-scented origami braille cranes. This past winter, I created my third scented tactile performance called 100 Years of Blindness, which is an experimental lecture on photography. And I take this feeling of fecundity as a kind of a good sign to keep going, that I'm on the right path as an artist. Sighted People Suck was created in reaction to the stigma, ableism, and internalized ableism I encountered growing up and into. And so it could only ever be one show, one long complaint. My over-the-top, pissed-off performance can be fun and entertaining, but it's just a single note of the blind symphony. It's merely blindness as subject, which feels kind of limiting, rather than blindness as method, which feels incredibly expansive. Blindness as creative force. Embracing a multisensory approach to performance has opened up my universe of possibilities for me to perform beyond the spotlight. I'm going to end a bit with a little bit from 100 Years of Blindness, which is a project that brings together my research on photographs of anonymous blind people taken by kind of famous photographers. There are quite a lot of them, an alarming amount of them. It's also a multisensory performance about image description. Access and inclusion don't have to be boring boxes that you check. They can be exciting opportunities for innovation and creative practice. For example, I'll just call out this one resource that might be of interest. Alt text is an image description for digital images that blind people can access with screen readers and braille displays. So I'm going to introduce alt text as poetry. This website and workshop were created by blind artist Bojana Kokliat and Finnegan Shannon, who I've mentioned before, who is a disabled artist. And they encourage us to think about alt text as a kind of poetry, aiming for descriptions that are both concise and expressive. As with other worthwhile endeavors, alt text takes practice to master. However, the desire to improve should not overshadow the desire to try. In my opinion, the only bad alt text is an absent alt text. All right, so here's a little bit from 100 Years of Blindness, a scented performance lecture on photography. It's organized around 5 iconic photos of blind people. Our first photograph was taken in 1887 in New York City. And the token is it's a simple little scrap of tea-stained embroidered cloth scented with a gunsmoke accord. In music, notes are the building blocks of chords, and we use chords to build a song. In perfumery, notes are the building blocks of accords, and you use accords to build fragrances, perfumes. This Gunsmoke Accord is used to add special effects to masculine type fragrances, a touch of metallic brutality, smoky menace. Okay, so you've heard of the mind's eye, right? Well, how about the mind's ear? I need you to use it right now. Imagine a gunshot. Picture that audio snapshot in your head. Got it? That is the sound of Blitzlichtpulver, flashlight powder. It's the explosive form of magnesium that could be shot into the air to create a brilliant pop of artificial light. And it was this marvelous invention that made our first photograph possible. Jacob Riis was a police reporter in the 1880s, and he wrote about the astounding poverty in New York City tenements, but he felt like his middle-class readers were not really understanding how bad it was. And with this flashlight powder, he could, quote, shine a light on the darkest corners of poverty. Riis organized his, quote, raiding party and led them into the squalor of tenements. They burst into the rooms of their surprised subjects, armed with cameras and big pistols, through which they recklessly shot flashlight powder. Riis admitted that his raiding party carried terror wherever it went. He collected his photos into a book called How the Other Half Lives, Studies Among the Tenements of New York. And this is where I found our first photograph, upstairs in Blind Man's Alley. Blind Man's Alley was located at 26 Cherry Street in the Lower East Side, just a few blocks south of where I currently live. According to Riis, few glad noises make this old alley ring. Morning and evening, it echoes with the gentle, groping tap of the blind man's staff as he feels his way to the street. Blind Man's Alley bears its name for a reason, says Riis. Until little more than a year ago, its dark burrows harbored a colony of blind beggars. So the project I am currently working on in the New York Public Library, in the Cullman Center for Scholars and Writers, it's about blindness, photography, and AI, specifically AI image descriptions and access. So I asked ChatGPT for a description of upstairs in Blind Man's Alley. And this is a little bit of what it told me. The photo captures a dimly lit, cramped tenement room with rough, cracked walls and a low ceiling. The focal point is a small cast iron stove with a kettle resting on top, its stovepipe snaking into the wall. Two men and a woman huddle around it. The woman wears a weary expression and has loosely tied hair. Her hands are occupied with an unseen task. She wears a simple, long-sleeved garment, and her face is partially illuminated by the faint, but of course we know it's not faint, but ChatGPT read it as faint, light. The room feels suffocating, a space where survival is tenuous and comfort non-existent. That is ChatGPT. Pretty poetic, I would say. Not bad, I think. ChatGPT got things pretty close, although the first time I ran it through, it saw 3 men, and then the next time it saw 2 men and a woman, and then the next time 3 men, and so forth. So I consulted a human informant, as Georgina Klieg calls them, and she confirmed that the person on the right appeared to be a woman, female presenting. All of the eyes in the photo are closed, and my friend, who is an art historian, assumed it was in reaction to the huge flash, that flashlight powder. She remembered seeing other closed eyes in Reese's photos. And so I was curious. So it doesn't signify blindness necessarily. And she said, not really. We need that title upstairs in Blind Man's Alley to tell us that they are blind. The flashlight powder is obvious and harsh, and it makes these really dynamic shadows that highlight the low ceiling and the stovepipe. And perhaps it was in the capturing of this photo that Reese nearly burned the whole place down. He wrote, "When the blinding effect of the flash had passed away and I could see once more, I discovered that a lot of paper and rags that hung on the wall were ablaze. He and several blind people were in an attic room with a dozen crooked and rickety stairs between them and the street. The thought," he said, "the thought, how were they ever to be got out, made my blood run cold." His first impulse was to bolt for the street himself and shout for help, but instead he kind of played the hero and says that he wrote that he smothered the flames with a great deal of trouble. Reese claimed that the blind people were unaware of the fire, but one wonders. If I put myself into the place of the blind woman working on some unseen task, I imagine myself mending or knitting, perhaps patching up my husband's coat for the umpteenth time, more like a quilt than a coat now. If I imagine myself as the blind woman, then I feel the heat of the flames licking the halls, the walls, the crackle of untamed fire, the smell of gun smoke still lingering in the air, the shock of the flash still ringing in my ears. I drop my sewing bundle and I pull out of my pocket my scrap of fabric, my scrap of memory, a tiny bit of embroidery from the old country, my old life where my family once had nice things, simple pleasures, tablecloths trimmed with hours of stitches, tablecloths, ha! Now we don't even have a table, just this old stove. The scrap of tidy embroidery is from my grandmother, tea-stained and worn, now stinking of a sharp metallic smoke, from the gentleman who came to take our picture with his gun. He's to show the gentlefolk, the other gentlefolk, how we live down here, how we live and die down here, as if they care to look. When we describe and reimagine the image from within, we move from object to subject, from metaphor to method, from being seen to new understanding. That is blindness as creative force, not a lack, but an invitation. And so thank you. I invite you to ask questions, to give descriptions, reactions. This last bit is very much a work in progress, so I'd be delighted to hear what you think. And thanks for being here. Thanks again, Warren. We have like 15 minutes for questions.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions? Also, for those on Facebook Live, I'll be looking at the Facebook Live, so if you have any questions, just post them in the comments. Does anyone here have any questions?
Don't be shy.
I guess I can ask some. So I mean, I guess you didn't talk a whole lot about your book. You sort of read from it a little bit, but I thought one of the things that was interesting about it was that you it was very idiosyncratic, the history that you decided to share. So for example, you know, you didn't really go into Perkins very much. Instead, you went into the Paris School for the Blind, and when you did Helen Keller, it was the vaudeville. So was that kind of deliberate, the really allowing trying to pick some lesser known stories that related to you more personally?
Yes, definitely. I also I mentioned Perkins, but you're absolutely right. It's sort of in passing. I mean, already the story was so sweeping, right? I mean, I used to joke that it was sort of this humble project of like 2000 years of blindness in Western civilization, right? So I had to pick my stories, and it was really important for me to at least try to make the stories come alive by having some sort of personal relationship with them. Um, I feel like less so with Perkins, but certainly with Helen Keller, who she is such a juggernaut, right? I mean, and especially created by the mainstream culture by, this one book that she wrote that then became, it's so funny right now. I'm calling it a juggernaut, and at this very moment, I cannot think uh of what the movie and the miracle worker phew
Yeah,
right
her
is
book is
so it
the
was
story of my
so
life.
what's that?
And her book is the story of my life.
The story of
I
my
think that
life,
was the
right?
bestseller.
And she wrote that when she was, 22, like barely out of school. And most people, and it kind of ends, the story sort of ends with her learning how to communicate, right? But of course, she lives to be like 68 and has this amazingly dynamic life. I mean, more and more people are starting to talk about her very controversial politics, very lefty, right? She was a card carrying socialist. Extremely controversial in her day. And I feel like what we get, especially as kids who, read the story of my life, we get this very watered down version, very simplified version of life. So I guess I wanted to, it wasn't a biography of Helen Keller, but I certainly wanted to hint at that very dynamic life that we don't often hear about. And then with the School for the Blind, I felt like it was nice because it kind of tied into that like long history of blindness through Western civilization. I came to it as a graduate student, really thinking about like the Enlightenment and how strange it was that this term, this metaphor, the Enlightenment, right, that sort of completely uplifts the idea of like rationality, of light, of reason, all these things, right? Then sort of blindness is, on the one hand, sort of pitted against those ideas, right? But at the same time, we have the first inklings of ideas of like universal education, right? And so that's why the idea to educate the blind children as well. Like there were always really amazing, aristocratic blind people through history that were that had special education. But the big thing with that first School for the Blind was that like lower and middle class blind children would get an education. So that was pretty revolutionary. And then, Perkins School and all the other schools around the world started to blossom from that.
All right. Anyone else have any questions? Todd, it looks like you just unmuted yourself. So
Yeah,
Hi,
I mean,
Todd.
I take a lot of pictures, and of course, I try and make sure I put enough alt text in there uh, when I.
And I love it when you do, Todd. I'm so appreciative.
And the idea that you just put forward during this talk and not too long ago was the idea of alt text more as poetry, and I
Yes. And
really
you're
kind
also a poet. So
of so I really seized on that a little bit on the last photographs since you mentioned that, and I was just wondering like where's uh, the line on it, like where do we get from like she's wearing a black jacket with this and this and wearing these type of sneakers
yeah.
to where like the poetry becomes maybe too flowery or obtrusive or how do you balance those two, I guess is my question.
That is such an awesome question. And that's a really great question. As a photographer and a poet, right? I think you're perfectly in that pocket to to try and find that balance. And you saying balance is exactly what my answer would have been, is that it is kind of a negotiation, I would say, You know, I didn't talk about it too much in this talk, but something that I've thought about a lot from somebody like Georgina Klieg and others, that talk about, you know, the problem of this idea of being objective, right? The problem of the objective image description, which is impossible, right? Like we all see, which is why I always kind of my tagline is like, we see, you know, sight doesn't just happen in the eyes, it happens in the mind. And that means that we bring all of our biases and affinities to bear, right? When we're describing an image. And so there's no way to give an objective, singular, truthful, you know, quote unquote, truthful description. That said, I think you're absolutely right. If we skew too far in the other direction of like being so sort of abstract, what is it going to communicate any kind of information? And I'll say a couple things about this, because I think one, just simply asking the question is important, and knowing that you're never going to get it right is really, really important. Also, I really think that it's an occasion when you're writing alt text or image descriptions, it's an occasion to kind of mirror the image that you are describing, right? So if you have an abstract image, it might be useful to use more abstract poetical language, right? And if you have something that's a little bit more, you know, journalistic, for lack of a better word to say, you might want to kind of dial it more in the direction of, you know, again, I don't want to really say objective, but sort of just the facts that you see as best as you can see them, right? Or perhaps the use value is also important, right? An alt text, for example, again, in say a journalistic setting, right, in a newspaper, is not going to sound the same. It's not going to have the same tone as an image description, say, in Art in America, right, where the you know, it's all about the painting or whatever we might be talking about. So I think it really depends on situation, and just thinking of it more as a this or that, and more of like a dialing this direction or that direction a little bit. Does that kind of help?
Yeah, I mean, context, you know, where's a Facebook post versus something more journalistic. I get it.
And also, I think what kind of Facebook post, like, is it just the picture, right? I think that's another thing too, right? That I think a lot of me and my blind friends get frustrated when somebody posts just a picture, right? Or a picture that is sort of augmenting some text, right? I think that makes a big difference too, in terms of like how much you need to say about that picture, right? So I think, yeah, exactly right. Super contextual. Yeah. Thank you for that awesome question. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to pick up before you just reference, I think it's I really appreciate what you had to share about that. I'm, as an artist myself, who's now blind and transitioning from a visual artist who was in that sighted world to, you know, making new work.
Mm,
Really thinking a lot about these ideas, and so reading Georgiana Klieg's work and your book, your work, really helps inform that. And so I love this
awesome.
idea of not just, you know, using it as, you know, being poetic in the sense of giving a better description for the blind, but really making it part of the work for all, right? Using, you
Yes.
know, the idea of like the label we have on, you know, with work in a museum or gallery setting being a descriptive to give you some context to the work. Why don't we make the visual description of the work part of that? And I'm trying to play with these ideas, so that's helpful in that. But my question that I have is
Yes.
more about this, what you were talking about earlier, your new direction with some of the scented work that I'm really interested in hearing more about. And so one thing, as you mentioned, you have people wear eye shades, which makes sense to have that immersive experience. But there's
Yes.
also, I understand, and you know, I'm very critical of this idea of using blind eye shades as a way of, it's often used in the blind community, certainly as a fundraising event, as
Hmm.
other things of dying in the dark and things I'm really critical of, this idea of come and, you know, give us money and you can wear, you know, blindfold eye shades, whatever term you want to use for the evening, and
Yeah.
you can experience what it's like to be like, and it really creates otherness and pity for those. And so when you're doing it in this context, it's a different context. I'm wondering if and how you do some, you know, frame this and use that opportunity when they're doing that to frame and talk about these ideas of, you know, you're covering your eyes, but you're not becoming blind or whatever. So
Yes.
speak to that.
Oh my goodness. Yes, such a great question. Like the easy answer is I literally say it in the show. I literally say these I'm calling these blinders, right? But this is not meant to simulate blindness. This is meant to get you in touch with your other senses. I very much say, this is not what blindness is, right? This kind of shared space of intimacy. A lot of times I'll even dig deeper and say, like, actually, this is kind of the opposite of being blind, right? Because I feel like as being a blind person in a sighted world, you feel completely um, in the spotlight, strangely, right? You feel so seen. And so when everybody is sort of blindfolded in this way, it doesn't actually really feel like being a blind person, right? And also,
Right.
I think that when it's done as kind of a didactic way, like, oh, this is what it's like to be blind, it basically almost always backfires, right? It scares the bejesus out of people, right?
Yes.
So I think that it's never a good thing to like put blindfolds on people and have them, like go march around a room or something, right? Because it ends up feeling like, oh my God, this is as scary as I think it is. And of course, as you're hinting, is so rightly, right? Like we learn all these tricks of how to be a blind person in the world. I mean, you have to learn to see, you have to learn to be blind. Like it's a new way of being in the world. I mean, part of the things that I think we deal with all the time, like I say at the beginning, is like the stigma, right? Which is so much harder than just simply learning the tools that we need to learn to be a blind person in the world. So I think you're absolutely right to make that point. And I think the only way I've been able to counteract that pity or that reinforcing of the fear is simply to state it out loud and state why I'm giving the blindfolds. Yeah.
Well, I
I
appreciate
agree.
you sharing that. It's great to know that you point that out. But I love the nuanced part that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of to initially put in a statement. I would say is that the idea that we're all doing this together in this context. So even that in itself is you don't have the gaze aspect that
Yeah,
we deal with.
right.
So that's an important detail to also include. So I'm glad that you consider all those elements in sharing that.
Yeah,
Because yeah,
thank you.
it's a lived experience. It's not, blindness is not absolute for me and not for most people that are I'm
Yeah.
considered legally blind, but I also have a lot of visual acuity as well. So it's not that simple. And so,
Hmm.
it doesn't signify that. So yeah, and yeah, not just these dining in the darks. There are situations where schools programs will say, okay, your child's going through this. This is what's going to be like, and they simulate it, and
Oh
then the
my
parents get more
gosh.
scared, right? I've heard these stories, but anyway, thanks for
Totally.
answering that. That's great. Thanks.
Absolutely. And to be continued, Bill, about like wall text, because I have to say, like, I hope we can continue this conversation because I have to say one of the reasons why I started my whole photography project is because, these pictures of anonymous blind people were basically being seen by, criticized by, contextualized by sighted people, kind of same idea, right? From a place of fear, from a place of stigma. And it was my feeling that I want to, give access to these photos because we need like our community to have something to say about what might be going on in these photos, and I think that like wall text, is so abbreviated so much of the time. Um, and I think that there's so much room for how like image description and multiple ways of seeing an image can really help us understand that, these things are not stable. So um, I would love to hear more about what you're doing with that too. So I'll stop now, but exciting stuff is all I want to say.
Here, here.
Uh, all right. Anyone else? Or anyone on Facebook? Uh, yeah. So I was thinking because I've been also talking to oh, why am I blanking on his name? He wrote The Country of the Blind. Which
Leland,
is,
Andrew
yes.
Leland. Yeah.
I was finding it sort of interesting that you didn't mention that H.G. Wells story in
Mm,
your book because that seems like
that's right.
such a
Yeah.
kind of iconic, how if you've never had sight, how it affects your view of the world. And
Yeah.
um, so yes, I was wondering about your views on kind of some science fiction books where blindness is a thing,
Mm,
like that and Day of the Triffids.
yeah. It's like that really heavy-handed, again, metaphor of sort of ignorance yeah. It's funny because actually The Country of the Blind, I think it's in my footnotes, and it was gonna be in my book, and there was just so much, and things just end up inevitably getting kind of
Fair
left
enough. You covered
out,
a lot.
yeah, they just didn't make it just didn't make the cut. I think I felt like it wasn't I think I felt like it wasn't influential enough. I'm not sure why I didn't go into it. Like, I know that there was a version of the book where I had like a paragraph on the country of the blind, and maybe I just didn't quite find the place to fit it in, right? Uh I I think I kind of just ended up lumping it in with like, how you can't read a science fiction book without there being a blind character, right?
Yeah,
Of course, it is kind of a different thing, right? I mean, there are some beautiful points. It's funny because for years I was about to publish it, on one of my websites. I think I finally did publish it on my Their Plant Eyes website and stuff. Because there are some beautiful points about like creating a town that's based on sightlessness, right? I mean, there's something kind
yeah,
of beautiful about it, right? But in the end, the sort of the brutality of it, and the sort of the intense ignorance, and the linking together again, yet again, right, of ignorance with blindness is just like, oh my God, do I have to? This is kind of, I think, my feeling.
yeah. I was thinking it would be an interesting creative writing experience to try to write that whole story from the point of view of the townspeople rather than
I
the
love it.
explorers.
Do it, Warren.
Yeah, I was trying to think of how I'd do that because you'd have to focus just entirely on the other senses.
And the girl too, she's such an interesting character. I totally am drawn to that. But yeah, it does feel like it would be an amazing story to be like have a multiple character kind of a situation. Yeah, I love it. Make it so, Warren.
All right, I'll try to do it. All right. Anyone else have any questions? Um, okay, I guess that's a good place to stop.
We're right on the dot too. 4 p.m. on the dot.
Yes. So the recording of this will be up on our YouTube channel.
Amazing.
Um, the edited version that doesn't have the 15 minutes of me just sitting doing nothing because that's pretty boring.
Good. Yeah, use that cut. Use the cut function. Use
But but
the
this has been awesome. Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, thanks so much for inviting me, Warren. Hope we meet in person someday.
Yes, I hope so. My brothers live in New York, so maybe someday.
All right, let me know. And thanks everyone for being here and for the great questions. And see you all on the socials. Reach out.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.